And it is my great honor, excuse me for this moving away from this video, I'll be right back, is that to introduce our guide, our facilitator, our leader tonight. Ryan Ruffiner, as many of you know, is our administrator here at Unity, but you may not know some of the other things about his background. And so it's a thrill to share with you that he is a two-time published short story author, and he's got additional publications in newspapers such as Galveston's Daily News. He loves reading philosophy and history. He has won over 15 local awards in Toastmasters, and you'll get an opportunity to see why tonight. When he's not working as our administrator and social media manager here at Unity, he volunteers his time as the League City chapter leader in the Citizens Climate Lobby, where he talks to Congress about bipartisan solutions to climate change. So he's a powerful activist, and he's certainly been a powerful activist in our ministry to bring greater good and awareness, and we're so delighted to have him bring his wisdom and knowledge and invitation to a greater understanding of our communications in the world through media literacy. So help me welcome Ryan Ruffiner. Thank you, Ryan.
Before we begin tonight, do we have anyone who is new to Unity here? It's all returning people, I think. Okay, so welcome back. Oh, yeah, okay. So this is my family over here. They're new. Welcome to Unity. This is our sanctuary. I'd like to start off with our Unity core values. In all that we are, in all that we live, we value unconditional love, connection, authenticity, inclusivity, trust, and compassion. Thank you. So why should we care about media literacy? Well, let me ask you this. How many of you here tonight enjoy being wrong or living in unnecessary fear?
No.
How many of you like being mistrusted by your friends and family and those around you? And how many of you believe that a country or community can make good decisions while their voters are being misled? Now, chances are every single one of you agree with these. Given the choice, we would all prefer to be right. Given the choice, we would like to live without fear, to be trusted, and we would like to live in the comfort of knowing that our country and community is making informed decisions. This is what media literacy is all about. It is about being able to read between the lines of articles and separate fact from fiction, bias from unbiased, and sensationalism from truly important news. Unity values support media literacy. Two of them, first and foremost: authenticity and trust. Authenticity because our beliefs shape reality. In fact, in some faith traditions, perceptions are reality. So if our perceptions are created from false pretenses, then the way that we exist in the world and the choices we make will be rested on foundations of lies. On the other hand, if we empower ourselves with truth, and we know how to distinguish from fake news and real news, bias from unbiased, we will be able to make better informed decisions. Trust. If you believe or share fake news, whether you realize it or not, people will come to trust you less. On the other hand, if you share only real and accurate news sources, people will trust you more, and you will come to be a valued source of knowledge. You will be the tiebreaker in our increasingly polarized and divided world, the person who is calm and can know what is truly happening. So what is the difference between our truth and the truth? We talk here a lot about living our truths, and that is valid. Everybody has their own personal truths. Personal truths, let's say, maybe you feel called to be an artist. Maybe you feel called to start your own business. Maybe you feel called to give yourself in service to others, much like our prayer chaplains here at Unity do. Those are your truths, and nobody can take those away from you. But there are still truths that transcend those. Things like gravity, weather, diseases, and in this case, facts. These things exist regardless of personal opinions. I love this quote by Daniel Patrick Moynihan, former US Senator. Everyone is entitled to his own opinion, but not to his own facts. If people's opinions made up reality, then we'd have 7 billion different realities, one for each person. That's simply not the case. Why is media literacy so important? Because truth is reality. And if we make decisions under the pretenses of fake or biased news, it's like making decisions while drunk or stoned. Now, maybe that seems a bit extreme, but if you think about what happens when you're under the influence, you are you, but your perception of reality is distorted to the point where you are a danger to yourself and others. I would say that nobody should get behind the wheel of a car while under the influence of alcohol, and nobody should get behind the wheel of democracy while under the influence of fake or biased news. We also might as well ask, why should a gardener know the difference between vegetables, flowers, plants, benign things, and weeds? As any gardener can tell you, weeds can destroy a garden. Let's say you're a gardener, and you want to plant some beautiful, beautiful flowers. These flowers represent the truth, accurate, unbiased news source. But then, suddenly, weeds start to creep in and spring up. And these weeds do something very clever. They disguise themselves to look like benign plants so that you don't know the difference. And they're left there unplugged. Well, there's a couple things that gardeners can do at this point. 2 of them are bad. One of them is to say, well, I don't know the difference, and I'm not interested in learning the difference. And then you leave them all there, but then what happens? The weeds overtake the flowers, everything becomes chaos. The other option, also not very good, is to say, oh, well, to heck with this garden, I'm just going to tear the whole thing up. But then you don't get the good or the bad, you get nothing. So the best option is to do what every gardener does and what our gardeners here at Unity do. Gain the ability to discern between fake news, real news, between flowers, benign plants, and weeds. Pluck out the weeds and leave only the flowers. In this case, you want to be able to identify the difference between fake news, real news, biased and unbiased, and pluck out the weeds and leave only the flowers of truth. There's 2 kinds of fake news, and I've got an easy way for you to remember this. There's misinformation and disinformation. Misinformation is when somebody mistakenly shares something that is false or fake. They don't know any better. Disinformation is when somebody intends to share something that is not true and they know that it's not true. The difference between fake and biased news is significant, although sometimes you'll hear them used interchangeably, and before this presentation, even I would use them interchangeably too. The difference is that fake news is a lot like Photoshop, and bias is a lot like cropping. So in the case of biased news, it'll take a legitimate story and it will crop it and frame it until you see only what they want you to see. Whereas fake news will insert something into the picture that never existed there in the first place. The difference between fake news and sensationalism is that sensationalism isn't necessarily fake, but it's not always important. There are 2 things that come to mind here. I was at my friend's house enjoying a barbecue when CNN came on with breaking news saying that there was a possibility that there was a picture of Trump's privates in the Mueller report. And I'll be honest, my head snapped up. I immediately ran over there. I was like, what? What do you mean there's a really? And then one of my other friends snapped me out of it like a trance. He said, come on, CNN, that's sensationalism. And I was like, yeah, you know what, that's right. What bearing does that have on any of our lives? The same thing happened with Obama's tan suit. Obama wore a tan suit during a press conference once. Maybe it wasn't the most flattering suit, but cable news networks talked about it for weeks and weeks on end when they could have been talking about anything else more important. These are things that maybe they interest some people. Maybe they should be in fashion magazines or a gossip newspaper, but they shouldn't be in our news. So why does fake and biased news exist in the first place? Part of it has to do with social media, and a lot of it has to do with advertising. A report by the Interactive Advertising Bureau says internet advertising revenues in the U.S. totaled $107.5 billion.
Wow.
That's a lot of money. It used to be that our advertising came on cable news networks. there's a difference between cable news network advertising and social media advertising. The biggest difference is the rate at which we can consume it. So if you're watching cable news, as many of us in this room have before, you consume what they want you to consume at the rate they want you to consume it at. They give you whatever ads they want you to see, and that's that. When it comes to social media, you can consume whatever you want or not at your own leisure, and you can scroll and read at your own pace, which means you can skip over things. We don't have that option with cable news. And that also means that in order to make that advertising money, they depend on you clicking on the articles, which means they will do just about anything sometimes to get you to click on the articles. This usually involves emotional storytelling. I like to say emotional storytelling is like salt in food. It captures and holds attention, so they use it. But too little salt in your food, too little storytelling in your news reports, it's a bit like reading an op-ed by Spock. It's bland, it's boring, it's dry, it's completely unappealing. On the other hand, if you have too much salt in your food, then it's unappetizing. It's all you can taste. You can't taste the meal itself. And in the case of reporting, you can't taste the story, the unbiased story, just the facts underneath. Another reason why fake and biased media exist is that people not properly trained or supervised in unbiased reporting will often make their own biased networks. So what does this mean? Part of it has to do with the proliferation of the internet. So just about anybody can start their own website, their own blog, what have you, and they can post whatever they want onto it. But it also means that sometimes, if people aren't properly supervised, they will publish things that have biases that simply weren't caught by the editor. In the news articles that I have published, I remember my own biases coming into play. I had no idea they even existed because I write fiction, so I'm used to using colorful language. I would insert all kinds of colorful language. I thought I was being very specific and interesting, and the editor tore it apart. There was so much red on the page, it looked like a Stephen King novel. I'm not kidding. It was brutal. One of the most important things he said to me, and one of the most important things you'll learn tonight, is that unbiased reporting uses the word said, because said is an emotionally neutral word. Another reason why fake and biased news exists is that political interest groups, including foreign governments, have vested interests in misleading the public. Now, part of this is because you can't vote on somebody else's behalf. But, as all of us here know, a voting season can change the destiny of a nation for decades to come. So if you want a country or a community to change significantly in your favor, if you can't vote for them, you can at least impact their opinions to get them to vote along the way that you want them to vote. From NPR, we have the report that Russia's Internet Research Agency purchased hundreds of thousands of dollars of normal advertisements and authored their own posts, content, and memes, and posed as American users. Facebook says they may have reached as many as 126 million people. Granted, that says may. We're going to get into that unbiased news, introducing doubt later. Twitter announced that about 1.4 million people may have been in contact with IRA-controlled accounts. So what is the solution to fake news? Well, besides suing the media networks or fake news websites and having them taken down, and this has been done before, the best thing I think we can do is to start with ourselves. How can we become disinformation detectives to become impervious to the biases that mislead people every day? I'd like to say that news is like food. Cutting ourselves off from it completely isn't really an option. Now we can say, well, I'll get the news from my friends. And our friends are great people, no doubt about that. But we tend to surround ourselves with people who share our values and beliefs. So if we rely only on our friends that we have come to know and love, then chances are we will be existing in a bubble that echoes back to us what we already believe, what we already want to hear. That's why it's so important to continue looking at the news, but educating ourselves so that we know what real news is. I like to say it's like food. We can't cut ourselves off from food completely, but we can choose healthier food. What do all these websites have in common? I'll call on some of you. Do any of you have any ideas what these websites may have in common?
Well,
They might be
no,
fake.
they're all owned by the same.
They all want great ratings.
Oh, they all won great ratings?
Uh-huh.
Okay, good, but not quite. Every single one of these websites is fake news. Not
Wow.
biased news, fake news. abcnews.com.co is intended to imitate ABC News. These all intentionally have names that look like legitimate reporting. And interestingly enough, when I dug deeper, I found out that a lot of these websites were started by the same two people, Justin Cole and Paul Horn.
Wow.
Now, we're going to take a look at some unbiased news before we get into all the biased news. When we go to the biased news, I'm going to call on you guys, like I just did, to get your input. It's okay if you don't know all the terminology, just knowing that something's off, and then going with your gut on that, okay? So, unbiased news introduces doubt. Remember, the last slide, a couple of slides ago, said may have. May have. Another word you'll see a lot is reportedly, and then another one is allegedly. This introduces doubt. This is the news media saying to us, this is a story as we have it now, but it's still developing. New things could come to light that change the story. So up at the top, you have Azar Argento reportedly paid off an accuser of her own. Reportedly. Now, let's imagine that that word wasn't there for a second. We would walk away from this believing, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that she had definitely done that. And then if another report had come forward proving that in fact she didn't, two things would happen. One, this media outlet would lose some credibility. And two, the people who believe that would have already made up their minds and gone on telling other people about how they feel and how the situation should be handled. Unbiased news doesn't speak on what can't be confirmed, and if they do, again, they introduce that doubt. Oftentimes, they will also allow relevant experts to speak for themselves. The bottom one, Pope Francis on clergy sex abuse, quote, "We showed no care for the little ones." Notice it allows Pope Francis to speak for himself, and he is directly quoted. They're not filling in words for him, they're not calling him names, it's just a man talking about a thing with a quote directly related to that. Unbiased news also gives multiple perspectives on a story. It doesn't tell you this is the only way to look at it. It says, here's a couple of ways to look at it, you decide. That's the great thing about unbiased news. It gives you just the facts and allows you to form your opinions for yourself. Oftentimes, biased news will try to make up your mind before you have the chance to make it up for yourself. We're going to see some examples of that. But first, clickbait. Clickbait is a tactic that is used a lot in biased news, but this has to be the king of clickbait from Snapchat. So there's a couple of things up here that jump out to me, but I'd like to take a couple of people's remarks on this. What are some things that jump out to you about these articles? Can everybody read these?
They're stupid.
Yeah, okay, it's stupid, yeah.
They're obviously clickbait.
Yeah.
Well, and they also kind of using like one of the best bargains in the world. You know,
Exactly.
they're exaggerations.
Yeah,
as well.
extreme exaggerations. Good, excellent. So one of the best bargains in the world is exaggerated and it's not specific. Now, we can guess that it's a bargain about a car because it's a car picture and bumper to bumper. But what kind of car? Different people buy different cars. In what country? Different cars are valued differently in different countries.
Is it really for cars? Because
I don't know.
It could be insurance.
Exactly.
It could be, car repairs.
Yeah,
It could be
that's the thing. We don't know. Another thing I like to think about when I see pictures like this is what did it take the people who made it to create this picture? Normally, like on the last slide, we saw it was pictures of the people in question taken by photographers. This one, they had to take a picture of a car, crop it out, put it on a galaxy background, take a picture of a dude posing Home Alone style, and then crop that out, put him behind the car on top of the galaxy background. A whole lot of digital messing around went into this photo. The one next to it, plus size male model, is crushing stereotypes. Now, exactly, what does that mean? It's not very specific. And what does crushing really mean? He might be changing people's minds, but how many people? Is there a fact or a figure we could use in that? And at the bottom, there are little praise hand emojis. So we know whose side this media outlet is on. There's a whole lot of bias in there. And that's not even touching on the aliens are real and probably around us one. Unfortunately, in order to show the bottom two, I had to cut off that picture. That picture of that alien is from the movie Independence Day. How many of you have seen that movie in here? Yeah, it's one of my favorite movies as a kid. It's a movie where these aliens come to Earth and they decimate pretty much all of Earth's population. So the implication here is not only aliens are real and probably all around us, but the aliens look like that. And there's no evidence for any of that. So let's look at one of the most common biases in media. Unsubstantiated claims. This is when a media outlet claims something without any facts or figures to back it up. Can anyone here point out, and there's some of these that have multiple things wrong with it. Who can point out what might be wrong? Let's start with the top one.
First word.
Yeah.
Okay, first word, socialist.
And it says continued her long-standing
Mhm.
pattern.
Yeah, so it's resting on the assumption that there has been a long-standing pattern before, which it doesn't dive into specifically. We don't know. The first word, socialist, maybe she is, but is she self-identified? If so, it should say that. It should have a quote for that, instead of just labeling her from the beginning. Another thing is continuing her long-standing pattern of not understanding how things work. How specific is that word? What things? Have any of you ever asked somebody for a thing? What do they say? Oh, sure, I know what you're talking about, a thing. When I say that to my mom, she says, oh yeah, the thing, next to the thing, behind the other thing. Until I be more specific and finally clarify what I mean. So it's very, very vague. And part of this, in biased news, comes from the fact that a lot of the times, if you keep things vague, the reader, me and you, will fill in our own biases in the place of that vagueness.
Politicians and preachers prey on that particular.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Down here we've got another great example. Senator Kamala Harris condemned the violent attack on Jussie Smollett. How many of you followed that news story? Anybody? Okay, you follow, you. Can y'all tell me what is wrong with that?
No attack.
Exactly, there was no attack. So
Yeah.
it says the violent attack. Remember the importance of those words we talked about earlier? Reportedly and allegedly.
Well,
They
it's
said-
also really a hyperbole. I mean,
Yeah.
modern day lynching, the
Mhm.
guy, like,
Yeah,
Really?
modern day lynching. So, in her defense, that's a direct quote from Senator Kamala Harris.
Stirring up stuff.
Yeah, stirring up stuff, but also the violent attack. So the Hill itself, the Hill quotes Senator Kamala Harris, calling it a modern day lynching. So it quotes her, but then the Hill says itself the violent attack. There's no introduction of doubt in a developing case. So this can damage the Hill's reputation, but more importantly, like I touched on a bit earlier, if you have people who believe there's no doubt to this, then they believe the violent attack happened no matter what. And they go out into the world making decisions, possibly political decisions, based on that knowledge, which simply, as we found out later, wasn't true. Opinion presented as facts. These are subjective statements or language based on personal opinions, assumptions, preferences, or tastes. They cannot be verified using concrete facts and figures within the articles. Now, granted, these are not articles, these are headlines, but we can see the same bias here at work. Look at the top one. Can you tell me what might be wrong with that one? Can y'all read it?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's just,
Hatred for Trump.
yeah, it's just,
Loaded words.
A lot of loaded words, good. Hegseth on left-wing critics of the Soleimani strike. The amount of hatred for Trump is disgusting. Now notice, the only quoted word in there is disgusting. Of all those words, one quoted word. It also says, Hegseth on left-wing critics of the Soleimani strike. Were there not other people who disagreed with it? Shouldn't it say so? It could be more vague. It could say critics in general. Or it could name specific names so that we, the reader, could follow up with it. Another thing, disgusting. What kind of word is that? It's an opinion word. It's a very emotionally packed opinion word. There's a lot of things I personally find disgusting. Beets, beet juice, cauliflower. There's a lot of things I find disgusting. But should I publish in the newspaper about that? I don't think so. Notice also there's no mention of it being an opinion here. These are opinion pieces, but they're not labeled as such. Sensationalism. Sensationalism exaggerates or focuses on unimportant things. Take a look at this. They're talking about an election in Pennsylvania, possibly a toss-up that's going to be a bloodbath. Ooh, scary. Now, granted, there are countries out there whose elections are bloodbaths, but in Pennsylvania, it's going to be a bloodbath. Again, this is drumming up emotional responses in the reader. By dramatizing things like elections, they get more viewers, more ad revenue, more people paying attention. But if you pay attention to articles that are biased, you will come away with bias too. This is another example of sensationalism. Less on the exaggeration part and more on the focusing on things that aren't important. Now, Washington Post fashion critic criticizes Melania's coat. Granted, fashion critics criticize fashion. Okay, but does that belong in the Washington Post? Vanity Fair, sure, but the Washington Post? Come on. This is the example I was talking about earlier, the Obama tan suit scandal, so to speak. Also be careful of when news outlets call something a scandal or controversial, because oftentimes they're trying to create the controversy to drum up more views and therefore more advertising revenue. In this case, Obama wore a tan suit instead of a black suit or a blue suit, and for weeks, cable news shows held roundtable discussions. They interviewed people on the streets, and a representative said that he pointed to a lack of seriousness on his part, just the color of his suit.
I thought it looked good on you.
Yeah, and that's fine. You know, it's fashion. What you feel about it is an opinion. It's not news, though, and we all here recognize that. There's also sensationalist language. Things like rage, scolded, waves of outrage, Twitter battle. I have been on Twitter. I have seen people get into disagreements. There's nothing on Twitter I would characterize as a battle. Twitter dispute, maybe, okay, sure. But a battle? Again, trying to drum up that dramatization to get more views. Democrats continue to rage at President Trump. Now, what image does that bring to mind? Rage. To me, yeah. It makes me think of a beet red face with steam coming out the ears, and that's probably not what happened. So they shouldn't say rage. There's another thing that's a bit hard to read down here, but I'll read it out. It's a tweet from Nancy Pelosi. It says, quote, "It is wrong for the president, as commander-in-chief, to fan the flames to make anyone feel less safe," she said in a separate tweet. Now that's not what that actually says. Said, exactly, she scolded me. But notice, when I replace it with the word said, nothing is actually lost. An emotionally neutral word allows her to speak for herself and us, the viewers, to make up our own decisions. Now maybe we can decide, if we want, that she was scolded. But that, again, should be up to us, not the media source. Mudslinging. We see this one a lot around election season. You know the type. They got the grainy photos of their opponent, the deep voice guy talking about how they're bad for America and bad for the state. Mudslinging and ad hominem, which means attack on man, is when unfair or insulting things are said about an opponent, typically so the person doesn't have to engage with them. Bret Stephens is not a bedbug, he's a delicate snowflake. It is usually used to discredit someone without having an argument. So we don't even have to know who Bret Stephens is. We know very clearly what the author wants us to think about him. Usually, this is a sign that the author wants you to disagree with the person before you hear their argument because you're concerned you might agree with them. This also taps into a deadly and widespread logical fallacy called poisoning the well. This is the best example I've had explained to me. Imagine you're going up onto a debate stage, right? Your opponent's already up there. You get up there and your opponent says, "Before we begin tonight, I would like to let everyone know that everything my opponent says is a lie and you cannot trust them." what does that do for the audience? What does that do for your credibility? Well, no matter what you say next, they're thinking about what the other person said, about you being a liar. And this is a perfect example of that. Mudslinging with poisoning the well. Before you get to know who Bret Stephens is, before you get to know the content of his character or his argument or who he is as a person, this author has labeled him so you turn against him. So be very careful of this. Mind reading. I'm going to call on y'all in a second. Mind reading is a type of media bias that occurs in journalism when a writer assumes they know what another person thinks or assumes that their own personal beliefs reflects all of reality. So we got two underlined parts up here. What can y'all tell me about these things?
So hatred of looking foolish is that you're assuming what he knows. Right?
Okay, good.
Nobody wants to look foolish, really.
Exactly. Nobody wants to look foolish. So firstly, they're mind reading, assuming he hates looking foolish. And then they're using this as an assumption that this is something that is his personal hatred. I don't like looking foolish either. I don't think anybody does, given the choice. Maybe he does. Again, maybe he does. Maybe these are legitimate things, but we just don't know. What about the second one? Can you tell me something that might be a little off with that?
It just doesn't even seem like it belongs in that sentence.
It makes an assumption
Yeah.
Okay, good. An assumption about?
about whether the Democrats are convinced
Mm-hmm.
they have a winning hand.
Yeah, we don't know that they're convinced they have a winning hand. What might help? We could ask them, and then we could have a quote up there directly.
You
But
don't have
we
to ask
don't
more
know.
than one or two or three.
Exactly, you'd have to take a poll. And that takes work. It takes a long time. And again, a lot of the times, because media outlets are competing with each other, oftentimes they'll rush the stories out, when what they should be doing is gathering facts. And this is not a fact, it is an assumption. Go ahead, Larry.
I was just gonna say, in some of our news media today,
Mm.
they can do accurate mind reading
Mm.
because some outlets know who their audience is.
Yeah.
And some of their mind reading is for the very purpose of keeping those people tuned into their station
Exactly.
on both sides.
Yeah. And that's a good point. During this whole presentation, I don't want to give the impression that one side is more or less biased than another, because ironically, bias is one of the few things that is bipartisan these days. Yeah, go ahead.
The other thing is the top, it says, 45 Congress, Supreme Court,
Mhm.
facts first.
Yeah,
And then they give this sentence that has no facts at all.
exactly. Good. Got a little bit of irony there. Here's another example. I'm going to read the sentence above it. They're talking about Obama. It's talking about he goes through the presidential motions, meeting with officials and foreign dignitaries, holding press conferences, sitting for interviews, shipping MREs to endangered populations, ordering airstrikes. But there is no passion behind these activities, no restless energy, no managerial competence, no sense of purpose or mission or strategy, none of the qualities associated with leadership in business, politics, and culture. There's a lot of things wrong with this. We could be here all night, but I'll take a couple of things. Okay, can anybody tell me what is wrong? What jumps out to you about this? Go ahead.
It's all about 5 things he did do, and then they say he didn't do anything.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Good. So it talks about what he does do, and then it makes an assumption, which, interestingly enough, they talk about a lot of things that the president either should do or things that might be considered good, like shipping MREs to endangered populations, and then it tries to subvert it by assuming, mind reading, that there's no passion behind the activities.
That's fascinating.
Slant. Yeah, no, it's slant. This is when journalists tell only part of a story. This really gets into that thing I was talking about, tending to crop and frame things in a certain way. This can include cherry-picking information or data to support only a single side, and it prevents us, the readers, the viewers, from getting the full, uncropped photo to decide how we want to feel about it. In this case, it's talking about Ocasio-Cortez. She, along with Sanders, has received intense criticism for policy proposals like the Green New Deal. Can anyone here tell me how that might be slant?
Criticism from whom? I mean,
Okay, good. Good. Criticism from whom? So the critics, that part is not very specific. What else?
Also, policy proposals like the
Mhm.
Green New Deal. Now, was it specifically about that deal, or was it about something else, or are there multiple things? It's again
Exactly.
kind of picking what it's telling us.
Yeah, good, good. Cherry picking what they're telling us. Is this even about the Green New Deal? Because it talks about policy proposals and then it lists a hot button issue.
Right.
Another thing is that it is true. Policy proposals like the Green New Deal have received intense criticism. But haven't they also received support? And wouldn't it be more unbiased for them to tell us that? If they did tell us that, we could then weigh both sides and make a decision ourselves. Now, maybe we'll come to vastly different conclusions. Maybe some people will say the Green New Deal is the best thing ever, and other people will say it's the worst thing ever. But that should be up to us to decide. And it's up to them to just give us the facts.
Well, for a while, there was what they call the equal time policy,
Yeah.
which I love because that meant that I could say the Earth orbits the sun, and if they find one person that says the sun orbits the Earth,
Mhm.
they give it equal space in the paper, even though 99% of the people may agree with me, not that guy. They give it equal space,
Exactly. Yeah.
which is not equal weight.
Exactly. Yeah, I love that.
It will make me think, oh, well, there's a trick.
Yeah. So that's kind of the opposite and a dark side of slant. What he said in the back was, in case the Facebook Live couldn't pick it up, was basically equal time meant that sometimes two sides of the story, which necessarily didn't have the same amount of weight to it, were featured equally. Which means that viewers like us would see it and assume that there is a big debate over something which might not have a debate over it at all. The example you mentioned was, let's say, the sun revolving around the earth or the earth revolving around the sun. News outlets, I don't know if they still do this, but I know they definitely used to, they would give equal time to both perspectives, giving the impression that both perspectives are equally valid. Flawed logic, or sometimes called faulty reasoning, is a way to misrepresent people's opinions or to arrive at conclusions that are not justified by the evidence. How many of you have ever felt you were misrepresented by another person? Somebody, yeah, exactly. Everybody, I think, in this room has had their words taken out of context. And in this case, media outlets do this on a large scale. In this case, it's talking about Hillary Clinton at George H.W. Bush's funeral, snubbing Melania, refusing to shake her hand, and giving a awkward and bitter nod, so to speak. Now, how do we know that a nod is awkward and bitter? So if you think about it, if you have, let's say, a military commander, and he gives a short, brief nod to his subordinate, well, that may convey a lot of respect. But if somebody interprets it differently, they could call it awkward and bitter. We don't know if it was awkward and bitter. We're not living inside her head. We just don't know. And those are some of the three most powerful words you, as a media literate person, can say, and a media outlet can say. I don't know. We don't know. And you can even follow it up with another powerful phrase after I don't know, but I'm willing to find out. Bias by omission. This is when a media outlet chooses not to cover certain stories or omits information to support an alternative viewpoint. I kind of already explained it up here, but CNN previously reported the FBI's hate crime statistics released last November showed that hate crime incidents steadily rose over a 3-year period. Now that looks like on the surface it looks like a pattern. But according to the FBI's website, on top of these incidents, reports of hate crime incidents rose, yes, but so did the number of agencies reporting, with 1,000 new agencies. Do you think that might make a difference? More eyes seeing more things? Doesn't necessarily mean that the hate crimes are not rising, so to speak, but it means that there's more information that we need to know before we can make a conclusion about that. Omission of source attribution. This is one that some of you touched on earlier, very perceptive of you, when when a media outlet doesn't provide the background or context of the story, or they keep people's identities anonymous. Granted, sometimes this is important, sometimes people's identities need to be protected so that they're safe and unharmed. But, remember what I said earlier about relevant experts. How can we know if these critics are relevant experts that are well-versed in weighing in on these topics? Who they are. This could be anybody from a Nobel laureate to a KKK member. It could be anyone. We just don't know. But by saying critics and keeping it vague, it adds more weight to it. Bias by placement. These are stories a media outlet features above the fold or on the front page. In a minute, I'm going to show you another picture from the exact same day, but a different media outlet. Typically, these are a powerful bias because people will oftentimes only scan a home page and then go away from that feeling like they digested everything there is to know. Maybe you'll read a couple of news stories, but chances are you won't read every single one. In this case, on the right-hand side, we've got a lot of articles about Trump. On the left-hand side, the biggest article is about LGBTQ. Article below it, by the same author, also about LGBTQ. This doesn't mean that these are not unimportant articles. Doesn't mean they're not important things to pay attention to. What it does mean is that these things the media outlet wants you to pay attention to. These are the things they feel are most important, either to you, the viewer, or things they believe are most important, and they want you to believe them.
Ryan,
Go ahead.
could their motive not be that, and it might be that those kind of headlines will get clicks?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So their motive might just be money.
Yeah, the motive could be money. One of the things, though, to pay attention to is there are a lot of things that could get money, and I'll show you on the next slide, too. These are things that will not only generate money, because you're right, they will generate money, but they'll generate money because a specific group of people will click on them over a different group of people. So this one, same day, notice the biggest article is about the weather. It's about a hurricane. The one below it, international news, Hong Kong protests. And just below that, immigration, ICE arrests. Now they also have, to be fair, their own section for Trump, the Trump presidency, because as I think we can all safely say, it's been a bit controversial, and the presidency is overall an important position with far-reaching implications. But again, hurricane, international news, immigration, compared to LGBTQ news and Trump. A difference, same day, different news outlets. Okay, these next examples of biased news I'm going to show you do not have anything highlighted or underlined, but I know y'all can do it. And some of them, we could be here for a long time, okay? So, bear that in mind. What do y'all see that could be biased here? Go ahead, you raise your hands, okay?
Well, I was just gonna say all bad. You
Yeah.
know, that the showdown with them are all bad.
Exactly,
Yeah.
all bad, all bad.
How do you qualify that?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, anyone else?
Yeah, it says most of government
Mhm.
unconstitutional.
Okay,
It's like, okay, specifically what branches of the government are you talking
exactly,
about?
exactly. Which branches of the government are they talking about when they say, quote, most of government is unconstitutional? Also, who are they quoting?
Good question.
Very, very vague. Now at the top, Curie, you hit it right on the dot. Iran's options in a showdown with America are all bad. Who says so? There's no quote in there. It's not specific.
And the one about Western politics
Mhm.
changed. How?
Okay, good, good. Western politics changed with the Charlie Hebdo massacre. How? Good.
And then the other one, Iran blinks for
Mhm.
now.
Yeah. Iran
How you know
blinks. Yeah. What does that mean? What does that mean? They're blinking. It's either colorful language or it's nonsensical in this case. What about here on the right-hand side, the corner? What do you see up in that? Can y'all read that? What do y'all notice about those?
Well, that first one, how solid a precedent is Roe anyway,
Mhm.
question mark, what?
There's numbers.
I don't know what that means.
They're talking about Roe v. Wade.
Right.
Yeah,
I
but-
understand that part, but
Mhm.
how solid a precedent, I
Mm.
don't know, it just.
Well, even if you don't read that story, you can leave with the thought that maybe Roe v. Wade is not very solid anymore.
Exactly,
Right.
exactly.
Right.
In case the camera didn't pick that up, he said, when you read that first line up there, how solid a precedent is Roe anyways, the impression you get is that maybe it's not very solid at all.
Yeah.
Also, a whole lot of opinion pieces not labeled as opinions. The one below it, Montana glaciers, 1, climate hysterics, 0. There's a lot of things wrong with that.
They don't wanna pass laws regarding climate,
Mhm.
you know.
Good, okay. Another thing is, anytime you see somebody numbering or scoring like that, what does that tell you? What does that tell you when you see people scoring things normally?
They're saying there's a winner and a loser.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's a winner and a loser. It's a competition. There should never be a competition for the truth.
And they call them climate hysterics.
Exactly. Climate hysterics. They're name
There's a
calling.
neutral term.
Yeah. It's not neutral at all. Climate hysterics. Take that. The very bottom, this is one of my personal favorites when I was doing research for this. Medical journal declares war on natural gas.
What medical journal?
Exactly. What medical journal?
And how does a medical journal declare war?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Are they running down the street on glossy pages, gathering arms against natural gas? Come on. Declares war on natural gas. So we got a whole lot of biases that go into that. Declares war, that's hyperbole, exaggeration. Medical journal, not specific. Like I said, we could be here all night just going over all of these. But I'll give you another example. Okay. This is from BuzzFeed News. What things jump out at you?
Sorry about anything. Sorry. What?
About anything.
Exactly. Good.
Controversial torture exhibit.
Exactly.
Right?
Controversial. And if it's controversial, couldn't they have maybe some facts and figures on that? If somebody prominent has criticized or called it controversial, maybe a relevant expert, could they have that person cited up there? Of course they could. And the one that jumped out to a lot of you was the one in the corner. Elizabeth Wurtzel wasn't sorry about anything. How do we know? How do we know she wasn't sorry? Maybe she said something. That could be a quote. They haven't quoted her. It's an opinion piece, not labeled as an opinion. And I'll be honest, it's not the most flattering picture of her either. A lot of times, media outlets will do that.
Did you take these off the internet? Those are real things.
Yes, these are real.
Pages you're saying.
Yeah, these are all real.
You didn't make this up.
No. This is not fake news.
Quoting.
Yeah.
He's faking
I
it.
don't think you had to look too far beyond.
Yeah, no. I
You
literally
had to
just,
expose yourself to this stuff, so.
Yeah, I had to go over it again and again, practicing. Yeah, no. And what about the top? Remember we talked about bias by placement. So what is it that they're saying are some of the important things in their sections up there that we should pay attention to? Yeah, they've got Elizabeth Wurtzel up as an entire section, in the same section, mind you, that talks about Australia bushfires and the Iran missile attack. Now those two are very relevant. They affect a lot of people.
And the royal family.
The royal family.
Oh my God. Coverage.
That's quite a bit of sensationalism. So next to the Iran missile attack, which could influence all of us, it influences foreign policy, influences people's lives, then you have the royal family. Those are things that they want you to pay attention to. Another thing I highlighted was, sorry SNL, Astronomy Club is coming for your wig. First off, yeah, okay, I was hoping somebody here might be able to tell me what coming for your wig meant, because I personally have no idea.
Doesn't mean anything.
Kristen wig? Is it 2 eyes or 1 eye?
That's a
No, it's one.
Oh.
It's wig like a
like your wig.
wig, yeah. Coming for your wig. I don't know what that means, but also sounds a little bit, sorry SNL, coming for your wig. Anytime you hear somebody seeming a little bit belittling, or anytime you see somebody on the news shouting, screaming, demeaning, you can pretty much guarantee that's not an unbiased source. Okay, we're getting deep into it now. How many of you can point out, just pick one. I know it's hard to pick one, but you can just pick a couple.
Trump 4D genius.
Okay? What is wrong with that? Because you got something there, you do. Well, I'll tell you what, how do we know he's a genius unless we're living in his head?
Oh yeah, that's a good
tells us.
question.
He told us. He told us that he's a genius, but he must be so. Well, Kanye says he's a genius
He's
too.
a 4D.
4D genius, exactly.
What's that even mean?
Fourth dimension?
Fourth dimension. I wasn't aware that genius existed in dimensions. I think what they're trying to do here, and again, this is just my opinion, I think what they're trying to do is because so many of us know that we live in a three-dimensional world, they're saying that his genius is so incredible, it exists in another dimension above us.
That's exactly what they're saying.
Now, maybe you do believe he's a genius. Let's say, right? How do we know that? Especially in regards to this story. Oftentimes, we don't know if somebody's a genius until long after they've done the thing that somebody has said is genius. So let's say somebody develops a bunch of new theories about the world. Every single one of those theories could be wrong. But we don't know unless they're tried and tested. And enough time has to pass to do that. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, there are two competing headlines up there.
Mm-hmm.
The genius, and then down on the left-hand side, Pentagon disputes that they're pulling out of Iran. So,
Yeah, completely contradictory. What about,
Iraq.
Well, they're all sensationalized.
yeah, every single one of them sensationalized, good.
Yeah.
At the top there, the top left hand, find out what the establishment wants to hide. Who is the establishment?
Yeah.
Now that really depends on who you believe is running things. Maybe you believe it's the wealthy, in which case you could be more specific. Maybe you believe it's, I've heard some people say it's Hollywood elite. They could say that too, even if it's wrong. Notice that is very, very vague.
What side is that from?
Yeah.
This is from InfoWars.
Oh,
Yes, InfoWars by Alex
Doesn't
Jones.
seem like much different from CNN.
Oh yeah, very different from CNN. We got a couple more here. Crazy mugshot.
Got trans blue hair, Antifa.
Trans blue-haired Antifa militant arrested for reckless endangerment.
Well, the other thing, they got U.S. News and World News and
Mhm.
U.S. News, but it's actually all on, what side is that? InfoWars?
This is InfoWars. It's
So it's trying to legitimize
mhm.
their articles.
Yeah. It's trying to legitimize their articles by putting them under typical categories like U.S. News, special reports,
Yeah.
government world news.
Yeah,
things like
making
that.
it look like that's,
Mhm.
you know, U.S. News Today or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to point out something?
Accepted.
AOC's impending eviction from Congress.
Exactly.
That's
AOC's impending eviction from Congress. How do they know it's impending?
Well, yeah.
Nobody knows what the future is.
And then
And
it says government underneath, so you think, oh, it's a government.
mhm. Yeah.
Also stand condemned.
Yeah, condemned. Yeah, notice also that these two pictures over here are Photoshopped. Remember when we talked about biased news and fake news, Photoshopping, biased news is like cropping. In this case, I think we can all safely agree that there are not two Earths smushed together like this. And if we look at the Ocasio-Cortez picture, they have edited it and put condemned across her office plaque and notice of eviction on her office window. They've also put some kind of weird Instagram-like filter on it. I don't know why. But this is part of what fake news does. It inserts things that were never there in the first place to make you believe what they want you to believe. What about this headline? Ignore the eugenics plan at your own peril. Your own peril. It also blows past the eugenics plan at your own peril as if there wasn't a question to begin with of, is there a eugenics plan? There's no facts, there's no figures, there's nothing cited. It says the eugenics plan, which of course scares people, and then it scares them even more by saying, ignore it at your own peril. Let's run through the biases one more time. You've got unsubstantiated claims. This is when a media outlet or article claims something to be true without evidence. You've got opinions presented as facts. People saying, I feel like it's true, therefore it is. You've got sensationalism and inflammatory language, which exaggerates a point, or it flat out focuses on something that isn't important, like the royal family, in my opinion. You've got mudslinging and ad hominem. This is when a news article or writer will attack somebody's character rather than engaging with their argument, and usually it suggests that they don't want you to agree with them, so they're going to turn you against them before you ever get to know them. Next, we've got mind reading. This is when somebody assumes their point of view is the only point of view, or when they read somebody else's intentions or thoughts and assume they know what someone else is thinking. After that, we've got slant, probably the best example of what it's like to crop a story and frame it in a specific way. This is when only one side of a topic is discussed or shown. What this usually does for us as viewers is it makes us feel like the decision is already made up. Something is good or it is bad. There's no other sides to consider. It takes away our ability to make a choice on our own. Flawed logic, this is jumping to conclusions, like that one that's talking about Hillary Clinton snubbing and refusing to shake Melania's hand, the awkward and bitter nod, interpreting things without evidence, jumping to conclusions. We've got omitting sources, calling people critics instead of specifically listing who those critics are. Now again, fair enough, sometimes we have to protect a person's identity because their lives will be endangered if we don't. But we also cannot decide if they are a relevant expert or not if we don't know who they are. And lastly, bias by placement. That was the one with Elizabeth Wurtzel, featured prominently in other media stories, like the LGBTQ stories on the Think Progress, or the news and internationally, weather news and international news on Epoch Times. Okay, we got some unbiased news here, y'all. Sorry, yeah, unbiased news. Look at this, look at this. Oh. House to vote Wednesday to send impeachment articles to Senate. There's no name calling. It's emotionally neutral. It says send, not shove, not throw, not rage, just send. It's beautifully and wonderfully unbiased. And look here, this corner, opinion. It's not only in the opinion section, but it declares the article itself to be an opinion again in the heading. And that's very important, because look here, the danger from Iran didn't die with Soleimani. That's a kind of scary headline, isn't it? But at least it says it's an opinion, not once, but twice. There are a couple things.
What source was that?
This is NPR. Yeah. Thank you. This is NPR was also the source of the first one I showed, with the Aza Argento and the Pope Francis. Media literate people are more trustworthy and more authentic because they are aware of what's going on in the world. They know truth as it is, without delusions, without bias. This makes you a valuable source of information to all those around you, because when media outlets and other people are saying the world is this way because I think it is or because I feel it is, you can say, I've done my research, this is what I know, and here, maybe more importantly, is what I don't know. We cannot cut ourselves off completely from news, because that would mean that we are no longer aware of what's going on around us. What we can do is become like gardeners, discerning the difference between the weeds of fake and biased news and the flowers of pure, unbiased truth. One thing we can also do to be less biased is to make a list of our own biases, or even just become aware. If you have a liberal bias, okay, but acknowledge that. If you have a conservative bias, fine, but acknowledge that. If a headline makes you feel angry, sad, upset, some kind of emotionally distressful state of mind, become aware of that, become mindful of that. Now maybe the headline itself is neutral and it's just the subject matter that's got you stirred up. And that's fine too. But what's the harm in taking a few seconds, just a few seconds, to check and ask, am I being biased or are they? Check the URL to see if it's legitimate. Remember those fake news websites I showed you? There are people who have a vested interest in misleading other people. abcnews.com.co looked original because it looks like abcnews.com. Same thing with the Drudge Report. Houston Chronicle TV was up there too, which sounds like it would be an extension of the Houston Chronicle, but it wasn't. It was fake news. So check the URL to see if it's legitimate. And if you're not sure, just Google it. Is blah blah blah.com whatever a legitimate website? Check to see if the author or source is recognizable and reputable. And finally, watch out for inflammatory language, assumptions, mind reading, and other biases. It is perfectly fine to say, I don't know yet, and I don't know, but I'm willing to find out. Thank you. Is there any questions? Thank you.
Do you believe that part of what we are experiencing now is because news outlets, especially those on cable TV or on TV, have to fill up 24 hours of news? And the fact is, if you gave all of the important news probably about an hour, would do all across the world, all of the important news.
I'd love to go back to the 1 hour.
Yeah.
The 24-hour news cycle is.
It's entertainment.
It's entertainment, exactly.
Okay. Well, hold on. First, I want to answer that question. The question for our Facebook Live viewers is, do you think that the 24-hour news cycle contributes to this problem? My answer, absolutely. Because you have to fill time, because it's about filling time, quantity comes before quality. Making money comes before telling the truth. Okay, ma'am, your question?
Yeah, I was going to give you an example. The other thing that happens is that some report comes from a legitimate source and other groups pick it up. And I'll give you an example that Mark Kelly was an astronaut that flew for a year on the space station. That's a fact. What was reported out was that his chromosomes changed. That's a fact. What then came out of that was that he had major changes in his chromosomes. And then that actually got picked up by National Geographic. And in reality, he did have some changes in his chromosomes, and then they went back to normal. Which is what NASA reported out, part of the stuff, you know. It's what NASA reported out, but they didn't get the second part of the story. And then it just gets pushed around by legitimate organizations like National Geographic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that's a thing that seems to be pretty common with scientific research, is scientists will say, here's what we're learning about, here's the results, and then because they're scientists, they usually reserve making any judgments until they can make those judgments accurately. But then news sources, eager for a hot story, will go, oh my God, they have a cure for cancer. They're like, whoa, no. They're working on one. There may be promising results, but they don't have a cure yet. So oftentimes when it comes to science, that is a common phenomenon where science and scientists will report something, they'll report it with plenty of doubt and reservations, and media outlets, eager for a hot story, eager to say that there is some new development that you should pay attention to, will blow it out of proportion. Go ahead.
It seems to me that sometimes they're taking things out of context and then re-reporting it in a place where it's totally out of context with the original. So that's that kind of omission in a way, but it's also out of the context in which it was encapsulated originally.
Good. And it's almost like a media version of the telephone game. One media network gets excited about something and they share it, and then another media network goes, oh, sure, I'll share that too. And they share it, but it's a little bit different. And then another one shares it, it's a little bit different. And then eventually, weeks later, the story has completely evolved into something different with the original people who worked on it saying, whoa, wait a minute. We don't know all these things yet. We have some information, but we don't have all the information.
They do that with weather all the time. Sensational headlines.
Yeah, the other thing I was thinking about was that it seems that when we moved into this 24-hour news and the very fast-moving news, like there's constantly new information, because we're dealing with social media, et cetera, that news became less about reporting the facts. So there's a lot of speculating that goes on about what might or might not be, which then goes into all these other things that occur. Whereas instead of sticking to, it seems like in olden times, and maybe this isn't true, but there was a lot more of reporting and having done research to get that information, right?
Yeah.
Versus now, well, let's speculate on this and this and this and this, and then in the course of that, you've lost what the original seed idea was. Even, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's to fill the 24-hour news.
Yeah.
The cycle came from, right?
No.
No. It happened because Princess Diana was killed in a car accident in Paris. And so there was a rush. It was totally unnoticed because here, no one was on the news desk. And there was only one news station, I think it may be CBS, that was on, and they were the first to report it. And then they were calling in, so all of a sudden it's like, wait, we got to have people here 24 hours because we don't want a major event like that to happen again, and none of us are there. That's the only reason why you have a 24-hour news cycle. They want to be first to report it.
And advertising.
And advertising,
Interesting.
The other thing with 24-hour, we think that we're getting 24-hour news, but the fact is every one of those cable stations has hours of opinion. It has nothing to do with the news, it's just opinion. And they usually identify themselves as such when pressed.
When pressed.
Exactly. And I will say this also about the 24-hour news cycle. What if media companies kept the 24-hour news cycle, but instead of focusing, as they seem to now, focusing mostly on U.S. politics, what if they expanded that to focus on the world as a whole? So we knew what was going on in South America, we knew what was going on in the Middle East, in Australia, China, and all over the world instead. Exactly.
That's what BBC does. Because when I traveled overseas, it's like whenever it's that time frame, they're reporting on the U.S. news. Then when it's daylight in Europe, they're reporting on the UK news. Then they switch to Africa. Then they switch. It rolls with their time zone.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's brilliant.
Yeah.
So you don't really miss anything, and you get the fact.
Yeah, and as far as I know, they're pretty financially sound too, so they're not losing money doing that.
Yeah.
But one difference is they are also, to some extent, government funded. And what would happen if you did that, in my opinion, is that all those cable network stations would lose a lot of advertisers because the vast majority of Americans, I think, want to see those crazy headlines. And that's what they really want to see. It's entertainment.
They're looking for entertainment rather than news, right?
And that reminds me, I was watching the most recent Democratic debate, and afterwards, when they had the people weighing in on it, it seemed, to me anyways, and my family who was watching it, it seemed like the people who were weighing in were a little bit disappointed that the candidates hadn't gone at each other's throats. And we were sitting there like, well, okay, good, they were civil, so what? And yet I think you've got a point there, that part of it is because people seem to want that dramatization, that emotion in there.
There's a lot of clickbait that still came out of that afterwards about the candidates getting in each other's throats, and a lot of photoshopped clickbait ads that I saw, even though I was that's not how this happened.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes you've seen the event and then you listen to the pundit and you go, well, were they even there?
Yeah. I remember one of the people was like, oh yeah, these two candidates came at each other. I was like, oh, they didn't. It lasted 5 seconds and then it was over.
That's awesome.
Anything else?
Honestly,
Thank you.
Let me just say thank you, Ryan. That was very, very informative and wonderful. Let's give him some love.